Hey, Pretty Girl Club. Welcome back to the Diabolical series. This episode is inspired by my Patreon. So, if you're not a part of the Patreon and you want access to some of the best information, and especially if you are a binge watcher of the Exotical YouTube channels, be sure to join the Patreon. But I'm going to be talking about cultural capital. Okay, so what is cultural capital and how can we as Exoticals use that to our advantage? I feel like one of the main parts of our cultural capital is our collective image. So, as far as how we are perceived in the media, I do think a lot of people worship the phenotype that we have. I think if you look at not just black media, but like Hollywood in general and the music industry, our image is already out there. So, that is one aspect of cultural capital because, for example, let's say you look like Halle Berry. If you wanted to play into that, you could. You could do the same hair color as her. You could do similar makeup to her. You could do a similar aesthetic. So, one of the advantages that you have is that when it comes to your phenotype and your image in the media, you can actually play into the fact that you look like a certain famous person. If you wanted to play into that, you could, and you could use that to your advantage. Every celebrity that you see, every beauty icon, they all have a certain aesthetic. They all have a unique aesthetic. So if you ever wanted to tap into that look, you can do that and you're going to receive a similar pedestal as that person. So that's why I say being pretty is kind of like being a celebrity. So, yes, it's on a much smaller scale, but it still is kind of like being a celebrity. Have you ever heard other women who have inferiority complexes? Have you ever heard them say, beauty doesn't trickle down? They'll be like, oh, well, these celebrities, their beauty doesn't trickle down to you. Well, yeah, that's because you don't look like that celebrity. But if you do look like a certain celebrity, their beauty and their privilege actually does trickle down to you. So if there is a certain celebrity or influencer or there's a certain aesthetic that you really love and it looks good on you, you can absolutely use that to your advantage. I've seen a lot of makeup content creators do this. A lot of MLS women, especially back in like the early 2000s and the 2010s, they will title their videos like Aaliyah makeup look or Rihanna makeup look or recreating Beyonce's hairstyle. You know, they will be a person who already has her skin tone or they already have those types of features and then they will recreate a certain look and post it on social media and then it will go viral or a lot of people will click on that. And part of that is because our image is already reflected. Our image is already very popular. So we can use that popularity to our advantage. This is a part of why some people say that exoticals have privilege when it comes to social media. It's because we already are a beauty standard. So being a beauty standard, fitting a particular beauty standard, you can use that to your advantage. People worship beauty. A lot of men love to call women gold diggers. Okay, well, men are beauty diggers. But when it comes to cultural capital, there are three main forms of cultural capital, okay? And whenever I use that phrase and whenever I talk about social climbing and stuff like that, I'm really talking about your non financial assets. That's really what cultural capital is. So it is something that you can use to gain status or influence. Anything that you have that is a form of currency, you can use that if you want to gain like power and visibility. And I also hear a lot of people saying that it's shallow to talk about pretty privilege and everything is not about looks. And it's like, yeah, everything's not about looks. But what people don't realize is that your looks can give you access to money. So that's a part of why I talk about that on this channel. It's not about trying to just be this pretty little princess. No, it's about having access to money, having access to resources, using what you have to get what you want. And especially if you have family or people depending on you, then yes, you have every right to use how you were born to your advantage because nobody else is giving up their privileges. I don't see people keeping the same energy with people like Kylie Jenner saying that, oh, you should give up all your billions of dollars because it's not fair that you're financially privileged. No, I don't see other people giving up their money or their beauty and just giving it all away to charity and being poor. So being underprivileged and being at the bottom of society, that's not going to serve anyone. So the number one way that you can increase your cultural capital is by getting out of cultures where they have a victim mentality or an inferiority complex. Okay, and a lot of times when I use those phrases, people think I'm specifically talking about the black community only. The entire black community doesn't have an inferiority complex. I actually identify with black excellence culture. I don't identify with black trauma culture. And so, yes, I will talk shit about black trauma culture because that's not a good representation of blackness, and it's also not my black experience. So, why would I waste my time watching YouTube videos where people are talking about how much it sucks and how much like their blackness has held them back, or like nobody likes them, nobody wants to date them, and then they're accusing random people of being colorist, texturist, and featurist when they're actually not? Doing all of that stuff, randomly accusing people of being a racist or whatever, that does not help you to gain cultural capital. So one bad social climbing tactic is when women try to gain cultural capital off being a victim. I've never heard of anybody gain social status from being the biggest victim. That's not a positive form of social status, because remember, a part of cultural capital is you want to be aspirational. So people aspire to be like you. Nobody aspires to be a victim. No one aspires to be undesirable. No one aspires to be at the bottom or to be the most disrespected woman, or whatever that quote is, where it's like, oh, well, some women, they're the most disrespected, they're the least protected. Okay, who aspires to that? I'll wait. So a part of cultural capital is you want to use the currency of the culture that you come from, because it helps you to maintain a form of status. So, for example, I don't get mad if people stereotype me as being bougie or uppity. That's not an insult. Being bougie and uppity, they're actually that's a compliment. Yes, I want to be associated with this bougie culture because I respect that. I think that's awesome. I think that when things are bougie, if you look up that word in the thesaurus, it actually means like fancy, classy. So anytime somebody calls me bougie, or anytime somebody tries to negatively stereotype me and say, "Oh, well, she thinks she's better. She thinks she's all that." That's actually a signal that I have cultural capital that that person doesn't have. So that person views it as a negative thing to have privilege. They view privilege as bad. They view class as bad. And by the way, anybody watching this channel has privilege. So before you start talking crap about privilege, you need to check the fact that you have privilege. You live in a first world country. You have access to Wi-Fi. In a lot of cases, the people watching this channel are able-bodied. So all of those things are privileges. So it's hilarious how when somebody else acknowledges their privilege, then people say, oh, well, that's bad. You shouldn't have privilege. Meanwhile, every privilege that you have, you call it a blessing. Oh, it's a blessing that I'm able-bodied. It's a blessing that I have Wi-Fi. It's a blessing that I have XYZ. It's like, okay, so if you call your privileges a blessing, why can't I acknowledge my privilege and call that a blessing as well? Being beautiful is a blessing. Having access to money or wealth, or gaining attention, which is another form of currency, that's a form of social currency, that is a privilege, because in terms of things like social media or any job where you're facing the public, you're more likely to succeed. But cultural capital is your mannerisms, it's your accent, it's your style, it's your etiquette, it's your education, it's how you present yourself. That's an example of cultural capital. So like your mannerisms. Have you ever been told that you quote unquote act white? Your mannerisms and your accent. Have you ever been told you act white? Or like, have you ever seen people where they try to do an impersonation of somebody and they start snapping their neck and they start like snapping their fingers and stuff like that? What they're doing is they're trying to do the mannerisms associated with a certain culture. So when it comes to your mannerisms, how you move your hands, do you talk with your hands? You know, your hand gestures, your facial expressions, your accent. What culture do you want to be associated with when it comes to that? And in some cases, you can't help it. Like, I understand you can't really help where you come from. But that is something that you want to think about when it comes to cultural capital. A lot of people try to talk shit about me and they try to say, oh, well, you sound white. Okay, like, do you have a problem with white people? Just admit that you're Afrocentric or that you only like black scents and be done. So different people have different biases. Some people prefer people with black scents, meaning that your accent is attached to black culture, your mannerisms are attached to black culture. And remember that cultural capital, it is based on stereotypes, okay? I said what I said. So for all the people who are going to try to say, oh, well, stereotyping is bad, stereotyping is negative. Okay, well, you're stereotyping me anytime you try to say that I sound white or I talk white or that the Exoticals are trying to be white. We're not trying to be white. We're trying to have a safe space on the internet. That's it. But when it comes to your accent, people do, they have different stereotypes associated with certain accents. Like, for example, if you see a white person that has a deep Southern accent, like I've noticed that some people, they stereotype that as being like a redneck or like being racist. So that's an example of not having cultural capital or having like a negative culture that you're associated with. So that's something to think about. Your accent or lack thereof, it can get you in the door into certain places. In the field of journalism and newscasting, they don't hire anybody that has a really thick black accent or anybody that has a thick Hispanic accent. If they have a thick accent that is regional, then they won't hire you. So that's an example of the cultural capital of your accent or how you articulate yourself. It can open certain doors for you. This is also why some people stereotype you as being smart or they stereotype you as being wealthy. Like I've noticed for me, a lot of people stereotype me as being rich. And it's like, I don't know how many times I have to say it. I am not rich. No, I'm not a millionaire. No, I didn't come from generational wealth. But because of how I articulate myself, people, they automatically associate my accent with a certain culture. They associate it with suburban culture. So the slang that you use, the type of wording that you use, is it helping you or is it hindering you? Have you ever been around somebody where whenever they're like around black people, they try to start talking in a black accent? Why are they doing that? Well, it's because they want to gain black cultural capital. So they're trying to build rapport with people in the black community. So that's why they suddenly start talking in like this black accent. Some people call it like code switching. I personally, I mean, I'm multicultural, so I don't consider it code switching since I already grew up that way. But that's why people code switch. It's because they're trying to access cultural capital. This is also why you see some women running and begging and chasing to date certain ethnicities of men because they feel like they will have more cultural capital if they go and marry a white guy, if they marry an Arab guy, or whatever their type is, some sort of rapper or something. They feel like they'll have more cultural capital within that community. So this whole concept is all based on the type of lifestyle you want to live. So when it comes to your social climbing goals, what culture, by the way, every culture has pros and cons. Every culture has flaws. Black culture, white culture, upper class places, lower class places. Everyone has pros and cons, but if you had to pick your top 5 favorite cultures, what would it be? So like with mine, one of my top 5 is like Black excellence culture. I love like my suburban cultural background. I also like my religious cultural background, even though I don't even identify with being the same way that I was when I was younger, but I appreciate that cultural background because it opens doors for me. So think of your favorite cultures. It could be a certain ethnic group. It could be a certain geographical location. Do you love the fact that you're from the South? Maybe you love the fact that you're from the West Coast, or you love like East Coast culture. Maybe you love a certain country. Maybe there's a certain country where you've always wanted to travel there, or like you're really fascinated with it. Generally speaking, whatever cultures you're the most fascinated with, that is the type of cultural capital you want. So whatever man you're attracted to, that's the cultural capital you want. So if somebody is attracted to white men, it's because they want the cultural capital associated with white men. If she's attracted to black men, she wants the cultural capital associated with black men. MLS men, she wants the cultural capital associated with being multiracial. So there's no way to get out of it. Everybody wants to be a part of one culture or another. Etiquette is another one. Have you ever noticed that different cultures have different etiquette? So for example, in some cultures, it's okay to twerk on tables or to dance on a pole. For example, in stripper culture, it's celebrated to dance on a pole or to dance on the stage or on a table. But if you're going to 5-star restaurant culture, that etiquette, it doesn't carry over. That type of etiquette, you don't go into a 5-star restaurant and just hop on their bar and start twerking. So that's the etiquette that you're using is from a different cultural background. So which cultural capital do you value the most? What type of environment do you like being in? And there is no right or wrong answer. One's not better than the other. This video isn't meant to like put down anyone, but that's an example. So like nightlife culture, for example, that's a different culture than like brunch. So even if you talk about it in terms of restaurants, a brunch restaurant, that's going to be a different vibe than like a nightclub. Have you ever been told that you're doing too much, or have you ever been accused of being boring? So, what that person is saying is your etiquette, your social etiquette in this setting is inappropriate. They're trying to say that, like, your etiquette does not fit in with the culture of wherever we're at. So that's why I call certain people monocultural, then I call some people multicultural. Because, for example, if I'm in a nightclub and maybe I'm not twerking or something, and then somebody calls me boring, what they're saying is, hey, I'm a part of nightlife culture where we do a lot of twerking. So you're not doing that. So you're being boring because you don't fit in. You don't fit in with that type of etiquette. So, what kind of etiquette do you value the most? What type of etiquette do you like? This is also a big thing in terms of dating as well. Have you ever noticed that a lot of women they struggle with dating, especially outside of their cultural background? If you look at statistics, like for example, you know how some people say, "Oh well, a lot of men they prefer to date me. They prefer to date an unambiguous black woman over like a mixed race black woman." Well, if you actually look at stats, generally speaking, a lot of people do date within their racial background and like within their racial culture. Have you ever noticed that it's easier? You're more likely to attract someone within your ethnicity versus someone outside of it. Just generally speaking, just based on statistics in general. And especially if you do not have an inferiority complex, if you do not find yourself to be ugly, if you think your own features are attractive and you're a dark skinned black woman, for example, you're more likely to attract probably a dark skinned black man. And you're more likely to probably be attracted to that since you think your own features are attractive. So that's another example of like cultural capital. So being around people who look like you, or maybe if you feel like you fit in better with people who look like you, or maybe if you feel like you fit in with people who don't look like you, part of it could be that you have cultural capital outside of your ethnicity. So, for example, the black people that get accused of being white or acting white, or you get called an Oreo. Why do they do that? Well, it's because maybe that person grew up around white people and they don't realize that a lot of their cultural mannerisms and stuff came from like white culture as opposed to black culture. Or like in the Hispanic community when they say you're not a real Mexican. You're just American. You're a basic American. They're saying that because a lot of their mannerisms and their lifestyle lines up more closely with American culture as opposed to people from the country of Mexico. But another example of etiquette and how that affects your cultural capital is the way that you talk to people, kind of like conflict resolution skills or lack thereof. So, for example, have you ever been around someone who is poised and elegant and graceful? Have you ever been called those things? Oh, she's very poised. She's very classy. She's very feminine. Why do some women get stereotyped as masculine when it comes to their personality and other women don't? Well, it's because their cultural mannerisms and behaviors are more in line with like a stereotypical masculine person versus feminine. That's why people are stereotyping them that way. So, an example in a social situation is like when you are gracefully exiting a conversation without seeming rude versus a confrontational type of person who starts getting loud and maybe they start cussing or something like that. Those are two different forms of cultural capital. So the one who starts getting loud and cussing and all that, they have cultural capital on the streets. They have cultural capital when it comes to like almost this thug-like culture. And I understand that that's a survival mechanism. So that's why they have that. Maybe their parents came from that type of background and so they learned how to defend themselves. But that cultural capital may not carry over into other areas. Another example of etiquette is actually when it comes to flirting, when it comes to how you interact, like in my case. Part of the reason why like unambiguous monoracial dark-skinned black men have never made it into my dating pool, for example, it has nothing to do with their race or phenotype. It's more so to do with their personality type, kind of their flirting etiquette. The flirting etiquette is either sexually explicit or sexually suggestive, which I actually don't have a problem with. But the problem comes in when they start negging. So negging is like trying to humble the person or maybe trying to take away my blackness or whatever, stereotyping me, using skin tone stereotypes against me. Like I'm just bougie or like I act white or I think I'm white. I told you guys the story on the Patreon where this one guy, he was like, if you guys are white girls, just say it. You know, he was saying it to me and my other friend who happens to also be lighter skinned. So it's like sometimes the etiquette, people's, even when it comes to flirting and stuff like that, people's flirting etiquette or their etiquette at your job, how they send emails and stuff, and that's not a part of your cultural background. You don't go snitching. Some people's cultural background is that you don't snitch on others, and then there are other people who they do snitch and they do tell everything the person does, and they are called Karens. Well, why are they calling them Karens? Why didn't they call them Keisha? Well, they called them Karens because they associate that behavior with white female culture. That's why they're calling it that. So when I hear people talk about etiquette, I feel like they don't go enough into detail. So like there is social etiquette that you would have at different settings, and we will go more into detail about specific things in the Patreon. I feel like a lot of this information is way too good for YouTube, but yeah, that's an example of having cultural capital in like maybe a classy setting, or maybe you have cultural capital in a work setting. So like maybe you're the corporate queen. Maybe you do really well in the workplace. There are some people who they always make friends at work. They always have somebody to sit with at lunch. They're always really popular in the office. And then there are other people who don't really have a lot of cultural capital in corporate. I mean, myself included. I don't consider myself to be someone who has a lot of corporate cultural capital because I don't really like a lot of the people. Just being honest, like throughout almost every job I've had, there's almost always somebody that ends up taking me off. But then I eventually realized that the corporate culture doesn't align. Like, I don't want that type of cultural capital. I'd rather have an entrepreneurial type of capital where I work for myself. Like kind of this boss babe, you know, a lot of people talk shit about it, but I actually like kind of the boss babe or soft life or luxury. You know how they talk about like black women in luxury and all this other stuff, or like the women who are more leisurely with their time. They're more of like a creative entrepreneur. That's the type of cultural capital I tend to be drawn to. So whatever you're the most drawn to, that's a sign that you value that type of cultural capital. Have you ever been around the types of women where they dress really nice? Well, it's because fashion, that's a part of their cultural capital, how they dress. That's a part of their aesthetic. Your aesthetic definitely ties into your cultural capital. If I see somebody with baggy jeans and a giant chain and a backwards turned hat and gold teeth, what type of culture do you think I will associate him with? And then if I see someone in a fancy designer suit and it's like tailored and they've got on a nice Rolex and they have like some nice shoes on and they have a briefcase, what culture will I associate them with just based on their aesthetic? So that's another question that I ask myself when it comes to things like my physical appearance. What cultural aesthetic, what image, what collective image do I want to be associated with? Do I want to look like a corporate baddie? Do I want to look like a Barbie doll, like I'm a part of that culture, like this hyper feminine type of thing? Do I want kind of like this baddie aesthetic, like an IG baddie? Do I want a hip hop aesthetic, almost like this video vixen? What kind of image do I want to portray? What collective image do I want to be a part of? That's a question you should ask yourself. What collective image do you want to be associated with? Whoever you're dating, that's the collective image you want to be associated with. If you're dating white people, okay, you want to be associated with the collective image of white people. I don't care what you say. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying that's what it is. You date LGBT, okay, you want to be associated with the collective image of LGBT people. That's what you like. That's a culture that you like. That's why you're in it. Whatever culture you enjoy being a part of the most, that's the cultural capital that you value the most. Social media. Obviously, I value social media because I'm a social media content creator. If I hated social media, I wouldn't have a YouTube channel. So if I were to come on here talking shit about social media, I would be a liar. So that's why I don't take a lot of social commentary channels seriously, where they're like, oh, social media is so toxic, and you know, look at these people, look at Instagram versus reality, and oh, this is all a facade. I don't really like when they do that, because it's like you're a hypocrite, because you yourself are creating YouTube videos right now. Your entire livelihood is based on YouTube videos. So what are you talking about? You don't like social media, or social media is bad. No, it's not bad, because you're engaging in the culture. Another thing when it comes to etiquette, something that people don't realize is like, okay, the way you dress. Have you ever had somebody where they feel like there's a dress code for different events. So like if they're going on vacation, maybe they wear a lot of like flowy long dresses and they wear like a sun hat. And then if they're going to a restaurant, they're always in heels and stuff. That has more to do with that person's cultural background. So they feel like, hey, when I'm traveling, this is kind of the unspoken dress code. Have you ever been around a friend where she tries to put an unspoken dress code onto you? I don't know if you guys remember that viral TikTok where the best friend, she got mad because her friend looked better than her on her birthday. Okay, so that's more of a cultural difference. One girl, she felt like, if it's my birthday, you have to dress down. That's the unspoken dress code when you are friends with the birthday girl. Similar to weddings, you know how they say like, oh, don't wear white to a wedding, or don't try to outshine the bride. So don't do your makeup all fancy. Don't try to do your hair all fancy, because then like you're taking away from her big day. All of that comes from a certain culture. So even when it comes to aesthetics, the exotical space has really been the pioneer. We are really the leaders of pretty girl culture on YouTube. I don't know any other YouTube creators where their whole brand, a part of it is based on like being pretty. So at this point, we can say for sure that we are by far the leaders of pretty girl culture. So I feel like a part of pretty girl culture is nobody can outshine me. Like somebody else's beauty doesn't take away from mine. But if you come from this culture of always being overlooked, or kind of being the invisible one, or being the one where she always feels outshined, notice how the culture of those women is, oh, I'm mad at her because she always gets picked and I don't. It's almost like there's this obsession that some of them have with getting picked. That is a cultural background. That's a part of their cultural capital, and they don't realize it. They're trying to attain cultural capital from being undesirable. I mean, I don't know what kind of capital you're going to attain from that, because again, that's not aspirational. So I don't want to be associated with anything where it's like nobody's aspiring to be that. I don't want to be at the bottom, if that makes sense. So that's why I call it a social climbing mistake, because they want to be associated with ugly girl culture, or with femcel culture, or with pick-me culture. And I feel like that's not a good strategy if you care about social status. If you don't care about social status and you don't mind being an outcast, okay, fine. Go for it. But another example of cultural capital is digital etiquette. So that's another type of etiquette, social media etiquette. So for example, have you ever been around a friend where she's like, oh, I can't put that on my Instagram feed? Or like, maybe her whole page has a certain color scheme, or like she has all these really beautiful photos. She doesn't just put a basic photo of her with no makeup. All of her photos are like beauty influencers are a good example of this. Beauty influencers, obviously, they make sure that all their photos are as beautiful as possible, because that's their whole aesthetic. That's their image. That's the culture that they are a part of. It's beauty culture. It's Hollywood culture. Like celebrities are another good example. Hollywood culture, kind of this flexing culture, or like, you always want to look as good as possible. You want to get like professional photography done. Notice how on their album covers and stuff, it's always a professional photo. It's not just some random mirror bathroom selfie. No, they're doing professional photos because that's a part of Hollywood culture. It's a culture of professionalism. It's a culture of excellence, or at least they're trying to project that image. I'm not saying that they always do a good job at all. But that's something else to think about. The way that you operate on social media. What is your social media etiquette? Where did it come from? So for example, with the people who got mad at me for not shouting them out or whatever, that's not a part of my social media etiquette. I don't owe anybody a shout out. Nobody owes me a shout out. If I want credit or clout on social media, I can get that myself. I don't have to try to ride somebody else's coattails. But for some people, that is how they get clout. It's by riding coattails. It's by being a sidekick. It's by being the quote-unquote token or whatever. Whatever it is that they feel is their path to success, that's why you hear people making fun of it sometimes. They'll be like, oh, well, you're just a sidekick. Oh, well, you're just a token. Well, you're riding that person's coattails. Oh, well, you're a copycat. So anybody that calls you a copycat, they're saying it because they're trying to participate in the culture of creativity and being unique. That is one of their main ways that they gain cultural capital. It's by uniqueness. So if they feel like you're a carbon copy of everybody else, that's why they're making fun of it. because they feel like, fitting in is bad. You want to stand out as much as possible. So one's not better than the other. But a lot of people, they actually have hierarchy thinking, even when it comes to cultural capital. And that's where a lot of their insults come from. So everybody is following a certain culture, whether they realize it or not. And for the people who try to say the exotical space is a cult, do you not know what the word culture is? Culture, the first 4 letters in that word are what? Oh, that's right, cult. So every culture actually does have some cult-like qualities. So they all might dress in a similar way. And they're not doing it consciously, but maybe they dress in a similar way. For example, black hairstyles versus quote unquote white hairstyles. They're totally different. I don't see a lot of white girls with like micro braids and box braids and locks or whatever. No, each culture, each ethnic group has their own hairstyle culture, which is literally based on the hair textures of the people in that culture. So that's why no matter which one you choose to engage in, there are going to be other people who are kind of similar to you. And that's why some people say, like, oh, it's a cult. Anytime you're developing a new culture, that's why they're calling it a cult. That's why they call the exotical space a cult-like space, because there are a bunch of creators and we are literally shaping our own culture. So that's actually a good sign. If they're saying, oh my God, you remind me of so-and-so, or like, for example, with the celebrity example, if you look like a certain celebrity and maybe you do their makeup, you do a makeup look that looks like them, or you do a hairstyle that they've done, and then somebody says, oh, you look like Aaliyah. Oh, you look like Beyonce. That means you actually succeeded because they can see the vision. They see who you were inspired by. So that's not always a bad thing. It just depends on your social climbing goals. Number 2, part of cultural capital is your physical possessions that have prestige. So for example, designer clothes, designer watches, rare books, art collections, exclusive memberships, like if you're a part of the country club or if you're a part of some fancy social club, fraternities, sororities, all of that, that's another form of social capital. So it's social status markers, or like a way that you're trying to be prestigious or exclusive. Like, hey, I made the varsity squad. Like even in high school, I made the varsity football team, not JV. I'm on the varsity track team. I'm on the varsity cheer squad. That's an example of like cultural capital. Another example is like the institutions you're a part of. Oh, hey, I work at Chevron. I work at Chevron Corporate. I work at JP Morgan. I work at, whatever the big company is that you work for, that's cultural capital. Oh, hey, I'm a doctor. I'm a surgeon. I'm an attorney. So the institutions you're a part of, or the institutions that you've been validated by, hey, I'm the mayor, I'm a senator, I'm the president of the United States. All of that is a form of cultural capital as well. So your titles, your credentials. So having a degree from an elite university, or like winning an award, like in the music industry. I won a Grammy Award. Or even like your family name. Being recognized for your family name. Oh, that's Mr. Johnson's daughter. So like in your hometown, were you from a prominent family in your hometown where everybody knows your dad, everybody knows your mom? That's another example of cultural capital. So how can we as exoticals use these things to our advantage? Well, when you're considered an exotical, so either being mixed, maybe looking mixed, maybe you are accused of benefiting from an ism, you can't help how you were born, but you naturally possess features that are seen as rare or striking within your group. So that's already a built-in form of cultural capital because you stand out. Your actual aesthetic or your actual racial background is causing you to stand out. So you already have this sense of novelty and intrigue. So that's actually very powerful when it comes to social climbing, when it comes to branding, when it comes to standing out. So the trick is that you want to protect it, you want to protect your image, and you want to stay in spaces where you get the highest return for your social capital. So an example is using your looks to your advantage. So whatever fashion or makeup, anything that amplifies how much of an exotical you are, you can just keep promoting that. You want to wear colors that like make you stand out even more. Maybe other people can't pull off certain hair extensions because it looks really fake. Actually, okay, so there was this other girl that I saw recently. Well, maybe I'll talk about it on the Patreon, but she was wearing the same wig that I have. Like, I have the same $20 wig that she has. And I noticed when she was wearing it, it looked horrible. I'm just going to be honest. I saw her from across the room. I was like, wow, her hair looks really crazy. But then I was like, wait a minute, I have that wig. I was like, oh my God, does my wig look that bad? And I actually went home that night and I pulled the wig out of my little clothing bin and I tried on that wig. It didn't look the same on me. It looked totally different on me than it did on her. Well, that's a combination of my facial features, skin tone, body type, how long is my neck, the length of my hair. It goes better with my body type since I'm tall. I'm naturally tall. I have like a long neck and everything. And on her, she had more of a short, stocky aesthetic. So like the length of the hair, it kind of hit at an awkward length. And then it's like her face shape, it just didn't really complement her face shape, the layers in her hair. Like whenever I wear that particular wig, I have layers within that wig or whatever to frame my face. So she didn't have the layers. And that's an example of someone who knows how to use cultural capital and someone who doesn't. I like to participate in beauty culture, so I study it. So that's how I know to like make sure to frame the layers, cut the layers to frame my face and to go with my bone structure, to go with my eye shape. So women who do not have cultural capital, they're constantly in this mode where they're just trying to figure everything out on the fly. They're trying to figure everything out as they go. Or they may try to copy somebody else, but then it doesn't work for them because they don't have the same skin tone. They don't have the same eye shape. They don't have the same bone structure. So not having cultural capital or not knowing what cultural capital you already possess, that is a social disadvantage because then you don't know how to make yourself stand out. You don't know how to social climb. And in some cases, some women don't even know what they want. So they're still figuring that out as well. So that's why you hear some women complaining, oh, I'm always at the bottom. I feel like I'm always the second choice. I feel like I'm always second best. They're saying that because they don't have their own signature aesthetic. They don't have their own identity. They're not sure yet what culture they want to be a part of, and that's actually okay. If you're not sure what cultures you want to be a part of, just keep testing it out. Just keep on jumping in and out of different cultures. Don't let anybody shame you out of doing that, by the way. Just keep jumping in and out of these cultures and kind of like experimenting. This is why I talk about social experimenting. You don't know how much you're going to fit in a certain place until you try it. So for some people, maybe they've only lived in one city. Maybe they've only lived in one region of the US. Maybe they've never traveled outside of their hometown. So they have a cultural viewpoint that is based on Fargo, North Dakota, or wherever they're from. And because they didn't try to branch out, they didn't know, they haven't been exposed to enough other cultures yet. That's another thing too. The more you expose yourself to other cultures, the more knowledge you're going to gain. Obviously, this channel is about multiculturalism, so I'm always going to promote that. But what do you ladies think? What cultural capital do you have, and how have you used it to your advantage? Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.